All right, today we are diving into something, well, a little different. We're cracking open a really unique research paper. And it's a wild one, because it uses AI not to build the next new thing, but to take apart something incredibly old, our entire way of looking at the world.
So, the paper kicks off with this massive, provocative question. It basically asks, what if our scientific worldview, the very thing that's given us so much progress, what if it has a fundamental flaw? A flaw that's not just holding us back, but maybe even hurting us. It's a bold place to start, right?
Okay, so let's get into it. The core problem, as the researchers see it, is this blind spot we all have. It's this deep, almost automatic preference for simple cause and effect thinking. A leads to B leads to C. And they argue this might be causing us to miss the bigger picture entirely.
I mean, for centuries, this has been our superpower, right? If you want to understand something complex, you just take it apart. You break it down into its smallest components. You study the gears, the cells, the individual pieces. The paper says this worldview basically treats reality like a giant predictable machine that we can just assemble and disassemble.
And this slide just lays out the contrast perfectly. On one side, you've got that linear thinking. Think of it like a perfectly straight, man-made canal. It's predictable, it's controlled, it's built piece by piece. But then on the other side, you have nonlinear thinking. That's more like a winding river. It wasn't built. It finds its own way, creating these complex, beautiful patterns all on its own. The paper's argument? We become master canal builders, but we've almost forgotten how to even see the river anymore.
And here's the official name for it: scientific reductionism. It's really the bedrock of so much of modern science. And look, the paper isn't saying it's wrong. It's just asking a really powerful question. What if it's only half the story?
So you might be wondering, how on earth do you even begin to test an entire worldview? Well, this is where the researchers got really creative. They figured, let's ask an outsider, an impartial judge that's been fed almost all of our scientific knowledge, but doesn't have our squishy human biases. Yep, you guessed it, artificial intelligence.
Their method is just fascinating. First, they didn't just ask the AI a question, they built what they call a universal prompt. You can think of it less like a question and more like a crash course in a whole new philosophy designed to teach the AI to think in this nonlinear way. Then, they took this prompt to 11 different AIs and said, okay, using this new way of seeing, analyze us, analyze the world we've built, and tell us what you find.
And this little snippet gives you a feel for how deep they were going. They weren't just feeding the AIs facts and figures. They were giving them these abstract foundational concepts, teaching them the difference between a system that's forced into order from the outside and one that finds its own order from within.
And here's the lineup of judges. I mean, it's a who's who of today's big language models. The whole point of using so many different AIs was to see if a consistent pattern would emerge, something that wasn't just a quirk of one particular model's programming. They were looking for a consensus.
And this is where things get really, really compelling. Because despite all their different training data and architectures, the AIs came back with a verdict that was just shockingly consistent. They all started pointing to the very same areas of damage caused by our worldview.
Let's start with the biggest one, the most impactful finding. The AIs, on average, scored the gap between our perceived self and our actual self at an 8.3 out of 10. That was the highest scoring and most consistent result. What it means is that we're taught to see ourselves as these simple linear machines, when in reality, we're complex, messy, nonlinear beings. And that gap, according to the AI, is causing some serious damage.
And you can see that damage just stacks up. Right behind that identity gap is the real-world harm from being forced into linear boxes. And then, a little chillingly, is our readiness to damage the environment, scoring super high. The AI's logic was pretty clear. If you see the world and yourself as just a collection of separate parts, you can't see how all those parts connect. The damage you cause to the whole system becomes invisible.
Now, this is really cool. The table shows where the AIs all sang the same tune and where they didn't. They had very high agreement on the damage metrics, things like how ready we are to harm the environment. But they disagreed on some of the more nerdy internal stuff about their own programming. And the researchers argue this actually makes the results stronger. It shows that no matter their internal wiring, they all came to the same conclusions about the external human world.
So all of this leads us to the final and maybe most important question. So what? Where do we go from here? What's the path forward after getting this kind of reality check from an AI?
And the conclusion isn't to just throw away logic and science. Absolutely not.
The paper suggests that linear thinking is an incredible, powerful tool. But it's just that, a tool. It's a special case, one possible outcome from a much larger, more complex, and frankly more interesting nonlinear reality. The goal is to put that tool back in its proper context, to see it as a piece of the whole, not the whole thing itself.
And that really leaves us with this final, massive question to chew on. This whole experiment used AI not just as a calculator, but as a kind of mirror to show us the limits of our own thinking. And if it can help us see a blind spot this fundamental to our worldview, what else can it show us about ourselves?